Hey guys. Okay, be honest. If a giant wave was about to crush you, would you rather it be water or molasses? Seems obvious, right? Water, because molasses, that's like breakfast food. That's like grandma's gingerbread ingredient. That's not supposed to kill you. Except in 1919 in Boston, it did. We're talking about a 20-foot high tsunami of sticky, brown sugar sludge ripping and sludging through the city at 35 miles per hour. People were drowning, horses were drowning, entire buildings were getting smashed apart, and the whole thing smelled like a caramelized nightmare for decades. Today, we're diving headfirst into the Great Molasses Flood, and to see why Boston basically became a giant candy-coated coffin for a day and how this absurd-sounding disaster actually changed the US history. So let's dive into the history of molasses first. Molasses isn't just the slowest moving liquid in your grandma's cupboard. Back in the 1700s through the 1800s, it was really a big deal. It basically is a byproduct of refining sugarcane or sugar beets, and people used it for a ton of things. Basically everything. Sweetening food, making rum, baking, drug deals, bribing children to behave, selling it on the street, selling your horse with it, any bundle that you can get. It was pretty much like home and auto, but like you could eat it. Molasses became the backbone of the triangle trade. Sugar from the Caribbean, to molasses to New England, to rum to Africa, to workers and slaves in America. Yeah, not exactly the wholesome history you'd expect from pancake syrup's evil cousin. By the early 1900s, molasses was still king, especially for making industrial alcohol, which was in high demand during World War I for things like explosives. In other words, molasses was basically the crude oil of the dessert world. A couple years later of mixing and matching recipes, enter the Purity Distilling Company in 1915. They built a giant steel tank in the Boston's North End to store molasses for processing. And by giant, I mean 50 feet tall, 90 feet wide, and holding 2.3 million gallons of sticky brown goo. But here's the catch. This tank was badly made. Like cartoonishly badly. Like literally like a Saturday morning cartoon villain kind of level of bad. Rivets popped, seams leaked, kids would literally come up with cups to collect the drips. How do you even make any money off that? The company's solution? Paint it brown so no one could see the leaks. Genius. Big brain move. And in January 1919, was the perfect storm for this tank. The tank was at full brim. Boston had a freak warm day from freezing after 40 Fahrenheit in hours, and the molasses expands when it's heated, so you can see what's going to happen here. On January 15th, 1919, at about 12:30 p.m., the tank exploded. Witnesses said it sounded like a machine gun. That was the rivets. And then, like a roaring freight train, that was the molasses wave. A 25-foot wall of molasses came barreling down Commercial Street at 35 miles per hour. 35! That's faster than most high school sprinters. That's literally faster than theater and band kids combined. Buildings were smashed, horses were literally picked up and thrown and drowned. Children, adults, no matter who you are, whatever age you were, the molasses had hands for you. Rescuers were struggling because, fun fact, molasses gets thicker in the cold. Of course it was getting cold. Oh my gosh, so it was like wading through cement that smelled like gingerbread. By the end, 21 people died and about 150 were injured. I guess you could say those hospitals were in a pretty sticky situation. Move on! Okay, aside from slinging sticky molasses jokes, after the flood, investigations found that Purity Distilling knew the tank was unsafe. Their engineers didn't do proper tests, and they rushed construction to meet wartime demand. Basically, corporate greed plus bad engineering equals molasses disaster. The victims and their families sued, leading to one of the first major class action lawsuits against a corporation in the United States. The company paid out $628,000 in damages to the city, and that's only about $9 million today, which is crazy to say. It set a precedent for holding companies accountable for negligence. So yeah, the Great Molasses Flood wasn't just a wacky headline, it was the turning point in industrial regulation, wrapped in the world's weirdest disaster. The rest of America basically treated it like a weird freak accident that a cousin would post on Facebook. Newspapers in New York, Chicago, and Philly ran it as half a tragedy and half a punchline. Headlines were saying things on the likes of Boston engulfed in sticky disaster, which sounds like an off-brand comic book issue. Seems like DC needs to give Boston a superhero. In other countries like England, the British press, which was already salty from the whole American Revolution thing, couldn't help themselves. They ran the story with the kind of understated snark that only Brits can pull off. Industrial mishap sent syrup coursing through colonial streets. basically a translation.
Well, that's America for you. Can't even store sugar water without killing a dozen people.
In Italy, it hit different because many victims were Italian immigrants. Italian papers called it La Tragedia del Melasso, which sounds like either an opera or a dessert special, which in this case, it was tragically both. The rest of the sugar and rum industry were mortified horribly, but also a little relieved it wasn't their storage tanks. They started advocating for everyone to reinforce tanks, pipes, and anything else that could flood a neighborhood with sticky death. Now, a big question that everybody had was, why does Boston have so much molasses? So picture Boston in 1919. It's winter, it's freezing, and the city smells like fish, coal smoke, and whatever ye old street grime was back then. In the middle of all that, a giant 50-foot tank of molasses is just chilling in the waterfront because molasses was the hot commodity of that day. This stuff wasn't just for cookies. It was literally the key ingredient in industrial alcohol, which was used to make everything from munitions to rum. It was a lifeline. And since Prohibition was literally weeks away, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company was hoarding it like it was like their last beer at a frat party that gets raided by the cops. Ultimately, when the tank erupted, it took everything out. And the cleanup, it lasted weeks. They had to spray seawater from the harbor to even get the streets walkable again. And for decades after, locals swore you could still smell molasses on hot summer days. So next time you head on down to the good city of Boston, make sure you take time in silence to commemorate those that we had lost in the Great Molasses Massacre. And maybe you might smell a little bit of freedom and pancakes on the side, just to reassure you and remind everyone that it'll never happen again. History is full of many tragedies that sound like punchlines, and I would love to be able to cover more for you. Thank you again for listening to this video, and I hope that you really appreciate and learn something new. If you'd like to see more from this, comment, like, subscribe, let me know what you want to see, and I'll get to working on it. Thank y'all. See you in the next one.